database called a database, we created a table called users, then we inserted some manual data in just so we can test our login process. So we're going to write a process to log this user in, and we inserted this data here, the username with Alex, the password was this MD5 hash, which we'll deal with later, and we've got first name and surname. So we've got our hash for security reasons. When we're logging in, let's just get rid of this that we used earlier. When we're logging in, we need to convert the password that the user specifies and see if that matches the same hash, because as you know, MD5 is a one-way algorithm and the result will always be the same. Okay, so we need to think about how we're going to set up our files. Now I'm going to have an index.php which is going to check if the user's logged in and display specific content if they are logged in or if they're not logged in. So we're going to have something similar to the following. We're going to say if logged in, display something, otherwise display something else. We could even use an if else if statement, or if else if, sorry, and we could say not logged in, and we're going to create this function which is going to check to see if session data exists or if a session has been set and if the session isn't empty. So we'll get rid of that for now, but that's just a general idea. We're going to sort of say in here we're going to say something like welcome, and maybe specify the user's name here. And then for this we're going to say please log in, okay, and perhaps display our login form. So we'll leave index.php for now. We're going to create a new file which is going to connect to our database. So let's say connect.inc.php. We'll call that connect.inc.php. So the first thing we want to do is we want to specify the host name, the username and the password. So MySQL host, in my case that's equal to localhost, and in most cases that is. If you're running on a local server, if you're trying to connect to a remote database, you'll need to specify the host name, but for now it's localhost. For me, the MySQL user is called root. These are the default settings, and because I'm using default settings, my password is equal to nothing. Okay, so now what we need to do is we need to specify what table we're going to connect to, and that is, or the database, sorry, MySQL database. The database is called a_database, and this is found, let's just pop into PHP MyAdmin here, so a_database. Okay, so now we can connect, so I'm going to say if MySQL connect, and then we can pop our variables in here. So the first variable is MySQL host, that's the first argument we pass through to this MySQL connect function, and then we say MySQL user, and then we say MySQL password. So if this function connects successfully, anything inside this block here will be executed. So we can then say let's say if MySQL connect, and then we can say we could say and MySQL select database, and the database we've obviously predefined in this variable MySQL DB. What I'm going to do is I'm going to change this around, and I'm going to say if this is unsuccessful or this is unsuccessful, then we want to kill the page and we want to specify the MySQL error. And that's with brackets there. So this we're echoing out the contents of this function, or the value returned from this function, which is the error last received from MySQL. So if either of these don't connect, so if we don't connect to the database itself, the server itself, or we don't select the database correctly, then we kill with an error. Otherwise we just carry on with our code normally. So we're going to declare or require this file at the top of everywhere where we need to connect. And the reason we do this is if we had, say, 5-10 files here, instead of writing this code 5 or 10 times, we just include this file here. So let's go ahead and test this connect.inc.php by including it inside index.php. But I'm going to require it so we kill the page if this file cannot be found. So connect.inc.php. Let's come on to our browser and refresh the page. Okay, you can see that nothing's come up, so hopefully we haven't returned an error. But now let's force an error. So I'm going to put local host instead of local host. Let's refresh, and you can see that unknown MySQL server host localhost. So we've retrieved an error. So okay, let's change that back, and we'll change the database name to a database 1. And let's refresh. And you can see we've returned an error saying this is an unknown database. So we know that either way, if we don't connect to the server correctly or we don't select our database correctly, we always echo a MySQL error out. Now, upon completion of development, you may want to change this to a error message in here as a string. This just means that then it's a bit more user friendly for your users, rather than outputting the content or the return value of MySQL error function. So for now, connect.inc.php is complete. So now what we want to do is we want to create a page where the user can log in. So I'm going to create this as an include file. So what I can do is then, in this if statement that I create inside index.php, I want to show that form, if you like, to the user. So let's go ahead and open up a new file. We'll start some PHP tags, and I'm going to call this login form.inc.php. So let's go ahead and start creating the form itself. Let's go down and start to create our form. So this form is called, oh, and just by the way, these includes depend on how your website works. So when we're using, let's say, form action equals something there, which to end our form. When we say form action, I'm going to specify the page that this is currently included in. So eventually this action is going to equal index.php, but I'm actually going to be using one of the predefined server variables to determine which page this is included in. If that doesn't make sense now, it will do later. But for now, our method's going to be post. Okay, so our action, what's going to happen here? We need to specify a variable up here that's going to tell us what our page is logged in, what page we are currently on. In fact, I might create a new file called, we'll call this core.inc.php, and we'll include some just variables, some predefined variables in here. The first thing I'm going to write is current underscore file, and that's going to equal $_server, and remember this is acts as an associative array, and the value we're going to give this, or the key we're looking for here, is script file name. So let's just let's include that in index, or include that in yeah, we'll include that in index.php. So require, let's go back, core.inc.php, and now here we can just echo that just to test it's working. So that is current underscore file, and let's go back and refresh our page. Okay, so current file is index.php. Let's go back to core.inc. I think what we could use is script file, perhaps. No. I think we can do script name. Oh, script name. Refresh there, see what we get. Okay, yeah, this is fine. So now what we've got is the location we want to submit a form to, because at the moment we're on index.php. However, if I was to say, just as an example, that we're not going to end up doing this, but in login form, if I was to require core.inc.php, and then I was to echo the current file, let's see how this changes. So at the moment we're on index.php, and that's showing us index.php. but because this is dynamic, it's going to update when we change the page. Okay, maybe not. Let's oh wait, sorry, yeah, we need to go to login form.inc.php, and then that gives us this value. So if the login form is included in index.php, then whatever we write in here is whatever we write for the form action is going to be displayed. So let me just give you an example of that first of all. Let's open up PHP tags, and I'm going to echo current file. Now you might be thinking, well, we haven't required the core.inc.php file in here, so how on earth can we use this variable? Well, the answer is we've required it in index.php, and we've also required, sorry, not connect, we've required core here, but what we're going to do is we're going to include login form.inc.php. I'm going to include login form.inc.php, so then it will read it still from here. So think of this as a long page with these included. Now, getting your head around this structuring system may be difficult, but it just means that everything's kept neat and tidy and you can reuse things, etc, etc. So let's refresh and see what happens. Let's go back to index.php. Okay, so what we've got up at the moment, if we view the page source, you can see form action equals, and we're going back to index.php, even though this code exists. So even though we're inside login form.inc.php and we're echoing the current file, because this is included within index.php, what we're doing is we're still taking this file name, so we're submitting the data back to index.php, which is still going to be processed in login form.inc.php. So it's quite hard to understand, but eventually as we go along you'll get it if you haven't already. So we've done that. Now what we need to do is specify our username and password login fields. So let's say username, and we create a form field here, basic HTML, so type text, and the name of this is going to be username, and then we want the password, which is another input type. This time it's password, and the name is password. So the type of this is password, just so it's sort of starred out by our browser. And then let's create a submit button. So type equals submit, and the value of this, I'm going to say login. So let's go back and refresh our index page. Okay, so you can see that we've got this login form now. Okay, so the next thing to do is process what's going to happen when this login form is clicked. So we can view an example of what's going to happen on the index.php page, even though we're processing it inside login form because we've included it. So let's first of all check if the username and password have been set, meaning the form has been submitted. So you may have seen this example a few times before. So we're saying if is set, and we're wrapping that in brackets, and we're specifying this post data here that's coming through, and we're saying and is set $_post, and the password as well needs to be set, and then inside the block we're checking if it's empty or not. So we're first of all saying is it set, and if it is, we're executing this block or running this block. And now we're saying if not empty, $_, in fact no, we can redefine the variables here, or reinitiate them into another variable. So username equals $_post username, and password equals $_post password. Okay, so now we can say if not empty username and not empty password, do something, otherwise do something else. So the something else will be you must supply a username and password, and the if it is entered is, we'll just put for now okay. So let's see how this works. So we'll click index.php, refresh that page, click login, and it says you must supply username and password. Now what we can do is type something in, click login, and it says OK. So we're on index.php, but we're processing what's going on inside loginform.inc. So we're keeping the index file as clean as possible. And eventually we're going to put this into an if statement, into a block, which means if the user is logged in, we don't want to show this login form. Otherwise we want to show the login form. So we need to continue in login form to actually log the user in. So how are we going to do this? First of all, we need a query, and this is going to be equal to select, and we need to select the username and password from, and let's go reference back to our table to see, from users. So we're selecting from users, where, and then we're going to say username is equal to username, and password is equal to password. So we've constructed here a query where we're selecting the username and password. In fact, we don't even need to do that. Let's just select the ID. So we're selecting the ID from our users table, where the username is equal to Alex in this case, and the password is equal to password in this case. Now we've got one problem already. Password is plain text, and the password stored in the database is MD5 data. So what we need to do here is we need to say MD5 wrapping around the password, which will then automatically convert this to an MD5 value. In fact, no, that's not going to work. I'll tell you why. If the user entered nothing, we're still generating an MD5 hash, so we can get away with not entering a password. So instead of doing that, let's create a new variable, which is probably better, called password hash, and that's going to equal to MD5 of password. So we've created a new variable. Now we can pop this into our query like that. So let's first of all execute this query. So query run equals MySQL query, and let's pop this into an if statement just to check that it works. So if that, then run this block, otherwise something. Now we've actually now predetermined, so if this query is fine and it works, then we can, in fact no, we don't need this else here. If this query works, then we can do something with it. And what we need to do with it is we need to check how many rows have been returned. Now if 0 rows have been returned, we have, if 0 rows have been returned, a username and a password don't match. So a username and a password combination haven't matched, which means they may have entered the correct username, they may have not entered the correct password, or vice versa, they may have entered the correct password but not the right username. So we need to create a check in here. First of all, we'll say query num, and that's, or num rows would be better, and that's equal to MySQL num rows of our query that we've run. And now we need to perform a check to say if query num rows is equal to 0, no such user exists, otherwise do something else. So here we're going to say echo invalid username password combination. Okay, so we've executed our query. As long as the query is structured properly and it makes sense, we're going to continue with this code here. Then we're creating a value of the number of rows returned. Then we're checking if that equals to 0. If it does equal to 0, it means that the username and password combination don't match, so we echo out a warning to the user and we don't log them in. Otherwise, we need to say OK for now, the user's logged in successfully. So let's use this as an example. So let's go back to our users table. We've got Alex in the password, which I think is pass123, but the MD5 hash. Remember, we convert the MD5 hash automatically when we process the login. And then we have various bits of information which aren't important just now. So let's try a user login that's incorrect. So I'm going to type Billy and pass123. Now bear in mind that pass123 exists in the database, but it doesn't exist next to Billy. So let's click login. We've got invalid username password combination. So our SQL query was structured correctly, but it returned no rows. Now otherwise we want to say if query num rows equals 1, then we can echo OK, because we're never going to echo 2 rows because the username is not going to exist twice. We're not going to have users on our website with the same username. So now let's try this with Alex and pass one. I think I typed pass123 and click login, and it says OK. So now let's return some of the data that we've been processing so we can make sure that we know, well, we already know it matches. But let's echo out username, and we'll echo out we'll just echo out the password hash so you can see how this is working. So once we've logged in correctly, username and pass123, you'll see that this is the hash, the password hash of what we've entered, which is starts with 322 and ends with A24. So 322 A24. So we know that it's converted the hash properly. We know that anyway. So now that the user's logged in OK and we've displayed this OK message, we don't actually want to do this. This was just for our purpose. What we now want to do is we want to set a session with the user's ID. So we've selected the ID from the database, but now we need to get this data. So I'm going to say user underscore ID, and this is going to equal to MySQL result. Remember this function from when we learned specifics on using databases. MySQL result, we're taking the result from the query that we run earlier. We're going for row 0, and we're looking in the ID column. Let's just echo out user ID so we know this works properly. Let's test now with adding another user so we can see if this ID is returned correctly for each user we log in. So let's insert some data. So we'll say Billy. Password we'll just use as the same thing. So pass123. First name Billy. Last name Garrett. Let's click go and insert that data. Now you can see that everything's done, everything's worked. We've got ID of 1 for Alex and 2 for Billy. So let's try logging each user in, and we should return now, we should return this user ID. So Alex, pass123, click login, and it's returned a value of 1. Now let's try Billy, pass123, click login, and it's returned a value of 2. So now we're logging the user in, and we're also returning the user ID. Now why do we need this user ID? The reason we need it is because we need to store it in a session, in some session data, so we can then tell that the user has logged in. And we can also use this ID to get any information we need from this table. For example, we can select the first name or the surname, or both, from, say, if we've stored 1 inside a session. That would mean that Alex is logged in, then we can get any data we need. So these are the fundamentals of a user login system, storing something that allows us to access data about our user, which can change. So one day I could log in as Alex, and one day I could log in as Billy, or another user could log in as Billy. Okay, so let's put this into a session. Now before we do that, we need to define something in our core.inc.php. Remember, this is included at the very top of our index page. Core.inc.php, we need to say session underscore start. Remember, we need to do that for all sessions to be able to use them on pages. So as long as we include this core.inc.php on every file, which we will be doing at the very top, then we're going to be able to log users in. We also want OB start before that, because what we're going to be doing is using headers, the header function, to redirect our user back to the index page when they've logged in correctly. So we need OB start, session start, and now in here what we can do is we can say $_session user underscore ID equals user underscore ID. So we've grabbed the user ID from the user that has correctly entered their username and password. Now we're storing it inside a session called called user ID. Okay. Now what we want to do is say header location, and we want to go back to the index.php page. We're already on that, but this will just refresh it. It will perform the checks to say is this user logged in, and it will give us some data out. So okay, so we're pretty much done there. Let's just go back to our index.php page, and we will create an if statement. Now let's assume create an if statement else, and then down here let's assume we'll ignore this for now. Let's assume that a session called user ID has been set and it isn't empty. Now this means that the user has logged in, because it means that we've gone through the process of setting this to the user ID of the correct user that's logged in, or the user that's correctly entered their details. So all we need to do is say if is set $_session user underscore ID and not empty $_session user ID. So for any reason that a session called user ID has been set and it's not empty, then we still run this code. Well, we say is it not empty because we need it to be, we need it to contain a value. In that case we can say echo you're logged in. Let's just escape that single quotation mark. Otherwise we want to present the user with the login form. So let's just go through before I test this whole login process, because we've pretty much logged a user in now. So let me just test this, or go through this in my head, or not in my head but with you guys. So we'll start from this bit here. We grab the user ID from the result of where we've already echoed this out, so you know what it does. We've got 1 for Alex and 2 for Billy. We set the session here, so this session will now equal 1 if I log in as Alex. Then we relocate to index.php. So we're already on index.php because we've included this. We can even refresh now just to show you that we're still logged in. So we're still not logged in. Now as soon as I type in Alex here, and I type in pass123 here, and I click login, we're going to process everything that we've already talked about. Then we're going to locate back to index.php, so we're going to refresh the page essentially. Then this check is going to happen again, but this time we have set session with the user ID key, and it's not empty, so we're going to say you're logged in. So let's test that. Click in login, and now it says you're logged in. No matter how many times we refresh this page, the session is still set, therefore we're still logged in. So now you've essentially learned how to log a user in. And that's basically it for logging a user in. What you can now do is on any other page that you work with, say you had a page called I don't know, tutorials.php, and you needed the user to be logged in, you could use this line. What you could do to make things easier and quicker is get rid of this inside here and create a function that allows you to quickly check if the user's logged in. So let's go back to core.inc.php, and we're going to create a function called logged in. And what we're going to do inside this function is we're going to say if, we're going to do exactly the same as what we've done, what we've just removed from index.php here, but we're going to put it in a function, so all we need to do is call this. So if is set, everything's set and it's not empty, return true. And otherwise up here we can say return, oh no, probably not a good way to do it. And we could say here, else return false. So if we are logged in, we're going to return true, otherwise we're going to return false. So if you know about functions, and if you've correctly learned about functions, you'll know I can just put if logged in, then it will say we're logged in, because this will return true, so this block will run. If we return false, we're going to include the login form. So let's go back to the page and see if that works. Yep, it still tells us that we are logged in. Hi, this is Alex from phpacademy.org, and this is a PHP video tutorial for the new Boston. Now, in this user login and registration system, we've already determined how to log a user in. So what we've done is we've created the index.php page with our if statement, and we've used our login function, which is located in core. We've also created our login form, and we've been able to process this inside this, and that's used as an include. So we're keeping our index.php page as clean as possible. Now let's go over to our browser and see that we're logged in at the moment, and there's no way we can actually get out of this at the moment. What we need to do is create a page that's going to kill all our session variables that we've used. You can kill specific ones, but probably better to just use session destroy, which we have already covered in previous tutorials. So if you're not comfortable with this, then go back and have a look at that. So I'm going to create a new page, and this is going to be called logout.php. Okay, so we're going to include a link in our login form, in index.php. We're going to say you're logged in, and then we're going to give the user the option to log out. So we're going to create a link, and it's going to say logout, and this is to logout.php. So let's just go to our browser and refresh. You can see we've got our logout button link come up. If we click that, we go to logout.php. Now we need to create some code inside logout.php to actually log our user out. And the first thing I'm going to do is think about if the user logs out on a specific page. Remember, we're including these, so we could actually, for example, we could show our login form in a header file in our page. We could have a template system with a header which never changes, so we could be on one of many pages when we click log out. So in core, I want a variable called referrer, called http referrer, and this is using again the predefined server environmental variables, and it's just http underscore referrer. And what this is going to do is this is going to tell us the page that we've come from. So let's try this first of all in logout. So therefore we need to require core.inc.php. Now there's a reason we need to require this anyway. Remember, in core.inc.php we've got session start. To log out, to kill a session or destroy a session, we need to start the session use beforehand. So require core.inc.php, and we're going to echo out this http referrer variable to see if it works. So http referrer. Okay, so we're coming from index.php when we click this button. So hopefully when we land on logout.php, it's going to tell us where we came from. So if we click logout, we've now got the full URL of where we came from, which is localhost /series /user /index.php. So after we've processed the logout, we can refer ourselves back to this page using that, and a combination of that and the header function. So let's go ahead and program in everything in logout.php. The first thing we need to do, or we've already done, is include this file, require this file, and we've started our session in here. So now all we need to do is say session underscore destroy. So this is going to kill all sessions that we've already created. We've only got one session, and that goes by the name of user ID, and we've set this here. So we'll just use the session destroy. Let's go to logout.php. Use session destroy. That will just make sure everything we've already set in the session is destroyed. So now what we need to do is we need to refer the user back to the page that they came from. So we're going to be using the header function here, And just to point out at this point, we're already processing data we're giving output before this point, so that's why we've used OB start. There's a tutorial on that as well if you haven't already understood why we've put that in. So we need header, and we're going to say location colon space, and then we're going to append on the HTTP referrer that we echoed out earlier to demonstrate. So HTTP referrer, and we're good to go now. So if we come into our index.php page, remember our index.php page, if we're not logged in, so presumably when we click the logout.php, sessions are going to be destroyed. We're going to be referred back to this page. We're not going to be logged in, so now we're going to include the login form and display the login form to the user. So let's have a look at that. Let's click logout and see what happens. Okay, so we've been referred back to index.php very quickly. See how quickly it processes, ready for us to log in again if we want to. So let me just try it again. Click login. You're logged in, so we can click log out again, and it refers us back here. So now we've successfully created our log out button. We can log ourselves out while we're testing this, and we can eventually log a user out if they were to use this system.